Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. The battle now politically is often charged with attacks on products as often as it is on ideas. You have domestic terrorism occurring with Tesla cars being attacked, graffiti on the plants because ultimately Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency is linked to Donald Trump. You have Canada getting rid of the Americano when it comes to your coffee and replacing it with their own version of freedom fries. Donald Trump is talking about selling our national identity. I think $5 million is the going rate. I guess it's better than just cheap cutting of the lawn, which is what we were selling it for before. But all of this feels like there's a real consumer identity tied to our nationalism, that somehow products and corporations and consumption have become central to all of our culture wars. And wanted to talk about that a little bit. Joining me today is the Prudentialist, one of our favorite frogs. He has his own great YouTube channel. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Auron. It's always a pleasure to chat.
Of course, we're going to dive into the progressive outrage, the attacks on Elon Musk and Tesla, the decision to try to push production, or rather products and consumerism as core aspects of the national identity. But before we do, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Hey, everybody. This episode of the Auron MacIntyre Show is proudly sponsored by Consumers Research. You've heard about Larry Fink and BlackRock and ESG and all the ways that they're ruining your life, making grocery stores more expensive, making video games more woke. Well, Consumers Research has spent the last 5 years making Larry's life hell, and they're just getting started. Their work and its consequences have been profiled in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and most recently, Fox Business reporter Charlie Gasparino wrote a whole chapter in his book, Go Woke, Go Broke, on how effective they've been at dismantling BlackRock's ESG patronage scheme. He's making Larry Fink lose that last bit of hair on his balding head, and you should follow Will's work on X so you can laugh along with him. His handle is at WILLHILD. So give him a follow. Again, that's at WILLHILD on X. So Trump comes in with this very large win, this very large mandate. He's definitely got a level of support that progressives and many on the left were not prepared for. Many leaders across the globe, as well as the left here domestically, obviously hate Trump. They hate Elon Musk. They hate everything attached to these people. And they've been lashing out, kind of looking sullen, ultimately having a difficult time finding a way to push back against Trump. I think they've really been searching for an identity. And what we're seeing now, kind of the weird thing that's starting to arise, is an attack on American products. Obviously, we see the overt vandalism of something like Tesla, that they're committing against Tesla cars, Tesla owners, the factories or the stores. And then we also see the weird obsession with changing American consumption. If you were consuming something from America, be it whiskey or coffee that's named after Americans, then you need to change the name. This seems to be the strange avenue that people have gone down. Now, as we referenced previously, we've seen the freedom fries phenomenon before from America to kind of mirror the Canadian experience. And of course, you look back to something like World War II, and there were encouragements to buy American or to focus on consuming, or I think more interestingly, I'm sure we'll get into that in a second, not consuming products in World War II in order to help the effort. But what do you think about this shift towards consumer nationalism? Is this really new? Is it something that's always been with us? Is it only kind of intensifying in this moment? What's going on there?
Yeah, so this brand name nationalism or consumer nationalism, I really do think is sort of a byproduct, more so now than maybe the last 30, 50 years than really what we've seen in the past. I mean, there's a difference in World War II where there was a coherent national identity behind America or any other country that was participating in that conflict, that you could identify that that brand was owned by your countrymen, that that brand or business was part of the war effort or was something that was going to be contributing to sort of the national cause, as it were, because the whole country at that time, not just the United States, but virtually everywhere, was participating in a total war economy. It was on a war footing. And even prior to that, you had brands that were associated with the national and cultural, religious, and ethnic identity of a particular place. Nowadays, not so much, primarily due to immigration. And so it's interesting in the wake of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who just resigned. Now Mark Carney's in charge. That you have a nation that had been declared by Justin Trudeau many years ago, almost a decade now, that America or that Canada is this post-national country. We don't really have this explicit identity or creed anymore. And so when it comes to this joking claim or Trump just trolling or tooling somebody that Canada should be the 51st state, which I think is a terrible idea. All of a sudden, we're now rallying around the maple leaf. We're rallying around the flag, so to speak, but we're doing it in a very performative, very liberal way, which finds itself kind of in this stark contrast to the same questions that we're finding ourselves here arguing and asking about in America. Like, well, what is an American or what is a Canadian? And so we're seeing all these. There's a viral video of someone, erasing the word Americano on a coffee stand, menu price and listing, and it says like the Canadiado or something like that, which, okay, fine. You want to virtue signal that it's okay to be against Trump and that it's okay to be against the United States, because a lot of progressives outside of the United States, and I mean even progressives inside America, the default is to hate, predominantly white middle Republican voting America. That's no big surprise. You and I are quite used to that. So the sort of rallying behind the brand name, well, obviously it's the way to do it, because you can't really rally around blood and soil or even around the national flag or the red ensign or anything like that, because that's not appropriate for you to do as a progressive. Really, the only thing that you can do is to make yourself a really good consumer. And as much as the left or progressives want to rage against capitalism or rage against the fact that there's no ethical consumption under it, if someone who is considered to be a cult leader or a progressive higher up or their politicians say that it's good for you to consume this product, it's not American, we support our own Canadian manufacturers or coffee or whiskey or whatever, they'll do it because they do have an ethical system. They do have a moral value coding that they have inside of them, just like you talked about earlier this week about progressives and conservatives having different moral visions. We see that really the brand name, the product, the box product nationalism is the only safe expression of patriotism or nationalism for progressives these days, because they have advocated and have been quite successful so far at obliterating any historical notion of a nation, people, identity, creed, and what have you.
Yeah, there's so much there that I want to get to, but just to start off, you're exactly right to point to the fact that in World War II, yes, there were focuses on certain consumption habits, but one, like I mentioned, there was one of austerity, right? Like, you don't consume this, don't go out and buy this, even if it's not a foreign product, but just because it's needed for the war effort. Grow your own vegetables in the garden, gather rubber tires so you can donate them to the war effort that they need, to recycle these for the front lines. There was an understanding that it wasn't just go out and consume this thing because that's what our nation does. It's consume only these products because they will only help the war effort, or don't consume at all, restrict yourself, something that you just don't see anymore. Also in World War II, obviously there's a much larger call, which is for men to go to war. If you're really at war, if you're really at battle, then you have to summon that patriotic fervor. People have to truly rally around a real national identity, the type that you're talking about. And so that was a fundamentally different scenario. Then you jump to 9/11, the kind of the post attack in New York, and kind of the way that we approached the global war on terror. And George Bush's first call isn't, hey, all patriotic Americans need to enlist. I mean, given what we later know about that war, obviously you can feel how you want about that. But at the time, his call wasn't just, okay, we have to go to war, we have to fight. His answer was, no, go to the mall, keep shopping, keep consuming, right? Like, this was the rallying cry for the United States. there's still some tie to the patriotism. Obviously, we still have that moment on ground zero, and the world will hear you on the bullhorn. So there's still some vestiges of patriotism at that time, but we could start to see the shift. And now, today, as you point out, all of these ideas about nationalism are forbidden. You have this post-national Canada, you have this post-national idea for many countries, but you still need these moments of patriotic nationalism when the machine wants it, right? So Ukraine, it turns out you can't have any nationalism until people need to go die in Ukraine, and then actually we're very blood and soil nationalists, but just for Ukraine, right? Like Ukraine is a very real country with very real borders. It's a very real people, and it needs to be protected. Obviously, other countries are also allowed to spontaneously have a certain level of nationalism, but it's not allowed to exist for most countries. So you have this moment where Canada is trying to rally against Trump. And even though it's gone out of its way to disassemble its national identity as much as possible, all of a sudden it needs to have a national identity so it can have a contrast, so it can have a war with Trump. But what is that national identity? Tim Hortons, fries with weird gravy and cheese on them. Like that is what defines Canada, is its consumption habits, because all of those other identities have been hollowed out. And so all of a sudden we need nationalism. We have to summon it out of nowhere. But the only thing left to do it with, ironically, for the left, is the very corporations and the very capital process that they have decried for many, many decades.
Yeah, there was someone who had tweeted literally a decade ago where they had said, imagine in the future where some conservative pundit is showing off his electric car and the left wants to burn it. And well, we're right there now as we speak. But it does illustrate that, the age of even say like the Tea Party republicanism or the Occupy Wall Street progressivism that had emerged after, the great financial crisis of 2008, the recession that followed, that's a long, far bygone age at this point in time. Because again, the very kind of multinational corporations, all these things that are not really owned by Canadians anymore, or owned by Americans, or owned by any other respective nation that wants to hold out for themselves and have an identity. Instead, those are the same people that are telling you and programming you that this is what is it meant to be a Canadian, or this is what it's meant to be an American. I mean, the United States has its own problems, absolutely. I mean, we have films that give these sort of biographical breakdowns of products, whether it's Ray Kroc's The Founder, that movie, or the Air Jordans film that came out on Amazon. Or I think now they have one about flaming hot Cheetos. Like, we've now reduced the American identity. We've reduced, even with progressive reactions in Canada, that, to be a Canadian is to not be an American. It's to not have American products. It's to support the progressives. It's to support Trudeau. It's to be so thankful for everything that's been done, and to make sure that you rally around these Canadian things of just simply via negativa America, which is a terrible way to identify yourself, because that leads the question, and it begs it, is that okay, outside of not being the United States, well, what are you? And I mean, the media has done a great job at sort of both an American and Canadian cultural consciousness, that they're sort of just polite, relatively disarmed Americans that don't really have our crazy politics, because they're still large part of the English system, whereas we aren't. But even then, that's a far cry from what Canadians actually are and what they were. And if George Grant were alive today to see what had happened to his country, he's still spinning in his grave as we speak, but he'd be horrified. And the same thing happens in America as well, is that we've reduced our identity to this very gauche, very kitschy, cheeseburgers, beer, guns, etc., and pickup trucks, which is, a far cry from the rich historical and national tradition that America has when identifying itself, as well as tying itself back to our European ancestry, both the English and the other Europeans that came here in waves of immigration overhand. In doing so, we've allowed our debates about national identity to be very watered down, whether it's this, creedal propositions, or, well, if you just ascribe to these sort of products, if you just check all the boxes on these subscription services, then all of a sudden you can be one of us. But as we know from our military and the constant, issues of spying and espionage, this desire to retrench and to have some form of restraint in our national security policy, a nation is far more than that. And if you were to even go back to, say, the progressive era of 1848, in the midst of all these revolutions, and we were to read Ernst Renan's What is a Nation, most modern Democrats would read that and they would consider that like a white nationalist screed for simply identifying what a nation is based on its people, its borders, its tradition, its religion, its language, things that we all consider to be part of a nation. But instead, really what it's been reduced to is, well, can you complain about traffic? Can you, are you also enjoying Amazon Prime product? Are you on Netflix or whatever? And that's become the reduction for the national identity in these sort of post-national states. And I think that there's still time to reverse that, or maybe there's still possibilities for it, and it should be reversed. But it does illustrate that right now our whole debates about tariffs and trade wars has left us with just, screaming over product and getting excited for next product.
I was listening to Dave the Distributist, both of our good friends, and he was debating a leftist because Dave is an addict and he just can't stop. And he was debating a leftist on Break the Rules, and they were discussing immigration, and the leftist said, "Oh well, illegal immigrants in Texas, they go ahead and join the culture right away. They I don't know, assimilate. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. They assimilate.
No, they don't.
They assimilate right away. Well, and his justification was because they're buying F-150s, because they're driving around in F-150s, and it's so stupid. It's so cheap. Like, first, you think that they can't buy F-150s in Mexico or Venezuela, but also, like, the purchasing of a beat up used pickup truck is a cultural assimilation for these people. Like, that's genuinely how the left sees it. And I find this particularly hilarious because, of course, Karl Marx believed that capitalism would deterritorialize, it would break down all these nationalistic bonds and identity. And this is what he liked about capitalism. A lot of people, don't know this, but Marx liked this aspect of capital. He liked that it broke down all these old allegiances, all these old unifying forces, because he didn't like those traditional hierarchies, those traditional structures. And so the breaking down of the nation was a positive thing. The idea that you would break down national identity, that capitalism would do that, was something that he hoped eventually accelerated then, like, these contradictions in capitalism that collapsed and brought about the communist revolution. But what has happened is that indeed many of these people have replaced the national identity, the true more metaphysical communal understanding of identity, into just these consumer products. And now that's the only thing they know how to communicate with. So, for instance, I've told this story before, but when I was teaching, we would play these like Jeopardy style games, and you'd throw in a fun one every once in a while. So here's one on the Civil War, here's one on the Industrial Revolution, and we'll do a fun one. And the kids always wanted to do brand names. And that's because I taught in a majority minority school. Most of the kids were first generation immigrants. A lot of them didn't speak English or were very unfamiliar with American culture. But the one thing they all knew was how to shout Burger King or McDonald's or Taco Bell when it popped up on screen. So they loved the brands because that was the one thing they were unified. That was the one language that unified the Tower of Babel, was consumerism. And so now you have this moment where there's a bunch of people who have no connection to the American identity, no idea what it means to be American, can barely speak the language, but their one unifying understanding of American culture is the fast food they consume or the stuff that they're going to buy off Amazon. And that has become, in this like weird, twisted, monkey's paw version, like the Karl Marx legacy, right? Is that, yeah, he got the destruction of national identity that he hoped for, but the contradictions of capitalism never come because communism is stupid and it doesn't work. And so he's just trapped forever in this completely deracinated, deterritorialized consumer economy with no national identity, but it never transcends this moment. It just becomes more crass, more corrupt, and now it's become the leftist way to identify nations. What are you eating? What are you buying? That's now the left-wing definition of culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, culture being reduced to something as minor as just the same awful food and poison that we put into ourselves is not going to last long, because all that that means now is that, you have a mass of people that are far more easily programmable. They have no historical ties to the country. As long as, XYZ spokesperson says this is the correct or morally right thing to do, where there's this social emotional pressure in order to be considered progressive or to be seen as good. And I mean, that really is sort of the motivating animus for a lot of liberals these days anyway, is to be seen as a morally good person, despite not adhering to any traditional roots in morality, whether they be Christian or otherwise. And that's sort of where we're resorted to. And that also means the destruction and having some form of iconoclasm in place to do so. And I mean, we see this very bluntly with, just widespread arson and the destruction and graffiti of Tesla, whether it be the cars themselves or at auto manufacturers and the dealerships where these are being sold. And again, this is because it's seen as the morally right thing to do. It doesn't matter that Elon Musk has described himself quite literally as a Democrat from 20 years ago, a 2005 Democrat. That doesn't matter. It means that you have this orange Fuhrer that has to be destroyed. You've aligned yourself with him, and that means everything is fair game. And that really does illustrate the difference, I think, in the midst of the reaction from this administration about all these things being destroyed. Yes, I know Trump did the whole sort of like show off with the Tesla. He had the red car at the White House and threw his support behind Elon Musk. I know that I think it was the Attorney General or at least someone up there, and it said that they're going to start investigating these attacks as domestic terrorism, which is good. But it really does illustrate sort of the major difference between the left and the right over these issues, is that the left knows that it has carte blanche authority and it won't never be prosecuted or attacked, just like we saw in the 70s with all these guys getting pardoned by Bill Clinton. That you can go out and kill and destroy things if you're a leftist, but if you're a rightist, you can't. All you can really do is sort of just tweet about it, and we're dangerously getting close to another monitoring the situation again.
Well, that possibility of escalating violence is a particularly concerning one, of course. We've seen the left become more and more violent. A lot of people, again, this is unfortunately a very convenient cycle we go through. We tend to treat leftist violence as if it's a surprise every time, but actually, it's a feature of life in the United States, one which we should not have to endure. This is why it's very important that the left is ultimately crushed because they are a violent force. They are a force for disorder in the United States. The riots that have occurred in the 60s, the violence and bombing in the 70s, things like the Rodney King riots, the LA riots. These are not, the BLM riots were not some singular thing, this aberration that occurred out of nowhere. This is a feature of leftist politics. Leftists burn your city and try to kill you. That is how they do politics. It is a club in the bag. It is a tool that they deploy when they think it is appropriate. And so when we see this new escalation of violence, obviously, again, we saw what happened in Ferguson. We saw what happened with BLM. We see these steps along the road. And then, of course, it leads to the shooting of Donald Trump, the murder of a Trump supporter at the rally. We see that this is just a continued escalation. And now the left has turned to civilian targets in a way, right? We see them celebrating the assassination of a healthcare executive by Luigi Mangione. We see now these attacks on Tesla. It seems that we might get a Weather Underground style movement from the left. They lost at the ballot box. They lost in their sacred democratic process. They can't win the election. They can't win the argument. All the censorship in the world, all the soft power in the world is not giving them the results that they're looking for. And so now, when they can't kill Trump directly, the new plan seems to be attacking corporations, attacking corporate heads, attacking people who are using certain products, and the hope that that kind of terrorism will win them some kind of political victory. Are you worried that they'll continue to expand these efforts to other forms of consumption, other products, other corporations, other leaders, and other industries?
Well, I think that there's a possibility, or at the very least, it's encouraged by the left on these matters. I mean, sure, there are some, very kind of, consider them lolcows who might get in trouble for posting about Luigi or whatever. But I mean, like, they're still going to make their money. There's still a radical group of people, patronage and otherwise, that are all in on this. And I think that it is a possibility that there's either going to be some kind of escalation, or there's going to be, at the very least, more attempts. I mean, even before Trump got into office, the Dobbs decision was leaked. Someone tried to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. And, this is one, and of course, Trump was shot at least twice. And so, I mean, anything is possible. And I think that if we continue to see, it's not like 2017. It's not like the first Trump administration where there was sort of this effective neutering. There's now been almost now collectively, it'll be 10 years in June since he's come down the escalator of the left radically sort of just one-shotting their audience, basically, simply saying, this man is an existential threat to your way of life. We will go back to 1950. The bio-Leninist machine has to continue. And if this does not happen, then we are okay with you taking matters into your own hands. That's a radically crazy notion, but it's also one that the left has advocated before in the past. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if either different CEOs or different groups or different conservative leaders are going to see it. Lately, there has been a trend on a very popular sort of mainstream conservative commentators, maybe not necessarily people I follow, but guys that are sort of big in sort of like the Trump, MAGA sphere in general, that have been, claiming it's been one after another for the last 2 weeks about being swatted. Someone's giving out their address saying that there's a violent altercation and SWAT needs to be there, firearms ready to kill. That's attempted murder for all intents and purposes. And so if the commentariat is being targeted, if industrial centers or, dealerships are being targeted that are associated with Elon Musk, I think that it's really important that either Pam Bondi or someone in the, Trump camp that has some power understands what time it is, because you are basically dealing with literal violent insurrectionists inside U.S. soil. And you're going to have governors, you're going to have mayors, and you're going to have police chiefs and the rest in these progressive cities that have no problem defending them, because they've been defending them, they've been letting them off, and they've been letting leftists and other radical crazies who shouldn't even be in this country to begin with in the first place, get away with murder, very literally.
Yeah, that's really important. And I did see Kash Patel say that the FBI is going to be treating SWAT calls as a terrorist threat. That they're going to be looking into it. They're going to be expanding that. That's good. I'd like to see more of that, honestly. And I say this without any excitement about it, but it's just true. And I think it has to be said at this point. It's very clear that the left has become a terrorist movement inside the United States. At least large swaths of the left are very comfortable with terrorism. They promote terrorism. They promote assassinations. They celebrate assassinations. They want to hurt and kill people on the right. And they have a network of, as you point out, Soros-funded DAs, NGOs that bail these people out. They have a network designed to alleviate the legal penalty as much as possible for the terrorism that they engage in. And for too long, the right has been very careful with its words about what's going on here, has been treating it as some kind of, again, weird one-off thing or a strange development that will go away. But what's becoming more and more clear is that, I just wrote a piece about how the foxes tried to become lions, right? The left had this vast censorship apparatus. They had this vast indoctrination apparatus. They were controlling things through soft power, the way of the fox, deceit, manipulation, these things. And it failed. And so they tried to move to hard power. They tried to arrest their political enemies. They tried to throw them in jail. They tried to debank them. They tried to assassinate them. And that also failed. And now that they have failed at soft power and failed at formal hard power, the desperation on the left is extremely high. And it seems like this extended, almost guerrilla warfare terrorism is a very real goal for the left. Like they are encouraging it. They are cheering it on. They are preparing to defang the legal consequences for it. And there really is just no excuse, as you point out there. There has to be a full court press, I think, by the Trump administration to crack down on this and make sure that these penalties are swift, powerful, and effective. That these people are not shielded by the left wing, by their governmental structures in different states or different DAs, different areas where they have kind of built up this ability to protect terrorism. I think that needs to be rooted out. I think that these people need to pay a very high price, because if they don't, this is only going to escalate. Swatting, this kind of stuff, is a direct form of domestic terrorism, and the people involved need to be treated like domestic terrorists. And if you don't do that and do it immediately, they're going to see that success and they're going to continue to escalate it, because it's the only thing they have left. They can't win politically. They can't do it. They can't win in even the realm of the marketplace of ideas, as much as we've talked about that. They can't win the debate. They can't win the arguments. They can't win the propaganda war. They can't win any of it. The only thing left in them is violence. They know it, and they are planning on it, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it really does seem to be the case. And unless this administration is willing to clamp down on it, they will feel just like they did in the first Trump administration, just like they did in 2020, where it is all bets are off. And we know what leftist violence looks like, whether it's from the Red Scare in the 1920s, all of the terrorist and radical revolutionary groups in the 60s and 70s. Again, I would recommend people read the great book Days of Rage. Those things are very likely to happen again and have happened again. And I mean, unless Trump is willing to stick BORTAC or somebody like they did in the 2020 riots against, Antifa and other cities that are just hotbeds of progressive radicalism, you're absolutely right. This militant leftism will continue. And the only way that, these things get crushed is with a swift and militant response to counter it and to close it. But I think it's very concerning right now that things are slow to act. But I also recognize that there's still a lot of foxes in the henhouse, so to speak, when it comes to this administration. I know that it's been battling with the courts, and that they feel sort of emboldened by this. That if the judiciary can just toss Article 2 of the Constitution out, then they're going to go ahead and do what they want. And it's really important that somebody, whether it be Trump or someone else in that administration, recognize what time it is, because the rest of us are all kind of waiting for that repeat of the 1960s and 70s, where, we're concerned about oil. There's a crisis in the Middle East. We're dealing with the Russians again. I don't think I want to see the follow through of that kind of radical left wing terror in major American cities. And I hope that someone clamps down on it quickly.
So back to the topic of consumer nationalism. One of the interesting things that happened recently was, there was this video where Sam Cedar, who is, this progressive pundit, is supposed to go on that Jubilee channel. They're always in your YouTube clickbait. It's, a Christian and a Muslim, argue, a gay guy and and they're always yelling at each other or whatever. They're sitting in a room and, kind of this strange, airport style, liminal space thing where they kind of stand awkwardly next to each other and have very stupid debates. But in this video, like 20 MAGA supporters were talking to Sam Cedar, and he did not do a great job. I guess he does this professionally, probably not very well. But one of the things that he ran into was there was a female on the panel who was debating him, and she simply pointed out an obvious fact that America is European and Christian in its origins, and these things define its culture and should allowed to be the dominant culture. And she wasn't saying anything radical. She just said, yeah, I mean, people have to assimilate to it. They can come and assimilate to it. She wasn't saying anything exclusionary. She just said, but like, you do have to assimilate. This is the culture. And Sam Cedar very clearly looked at this and said, oh, well, there is no American culture. There can't be an American culture. And if you think there is an American culture, then you're a racist. You're problematic, all this stuff. Now, a lot of people on the right reflexively know that Sam Cedar's wrong, but many conservative mainstream pundits and commentators and Twitter personalities have kind of adopted Cedar's position that we're not allowed to acknowledge Americans' heritage, that we're not allowed to expect other people to conform to America's culture, that recognizing America's culture is tied to its past, the people who are involved, is somehow deeply problematic. I mean, really what they believe in is trans ideology for America. right? Like an American is whoever feels like an American. Did you put on an American t-shirt that today? Are you Vivek Ramaswamy wearing your Texas shirt? Well, then you're an American, right? That has become the right wing version of American identity as much as it's become the left wing version of American identity. They're not as far gone as the left on this issue, but what do you think the right's adjustment is going to be when we're talking about this problem? Because I don't think the question of what an American is going away, what a national identity is going away. And there are a lot of people on the right who are heavily invested in a version of national identity that looks a lot like the left's consumer identity, right? Drink enough Black Rifle coffee and you're an American. The end.
Yeah, and I think that there's going to be the, wake up and smell the coffee moment, because the ongoing aspect of America being propositional or being a creedal confession or any of these loosely defined or sort of ambiguously defined terms for what is an American, that has to be confronted, and it will be confronted, because America will simultaneously, progressives and conservative, mainstream conservatives alike will simply say, well, this is what it means to be an American, and they'll offer sort of a melting pot style attitude towards it, or they'll, continue to rally behind the conservative reinvention of Martin Luther King Jr., about the whole, content of character, and that we should all be able to get along, ignoring every other awful detail about that man. So really, I think that you can say all those things, but still the blanket realities of what we deal with in this country all the time are in your face. You cannot escape it no matter where you live. Now, sure, there are some nice, really rich, white, progressive, liberal enclaves that are the closest thing that we get to an ethno-state in this country. But outside of that, I mean, you walk into any major metropolitan area and you think that you're walking through Heathrow, or that you're walking through LaGuardia, or that you're running through Dallas-Fort Worth, or any other major international airport in the United States. There's a million different languages. There's a million different people here. No one wants to get along. Everyone is ethnic and clannish and sticks to themselves. And it raises the question for yourself, well, can you make that sustainable? Obviously not. For a nation that wants to be either an empire or, have its power projected on the world stage, you can't tell me that America is a propositional country when you continue to arrest people from China that are part of the United States military for spying on China. You cannot tell me that this is good for America when we're living in a country where anyone can allegedly come here, somehow be an American, but then we send billions of dollars in remittances to every other part of the world. You've allowed, it's the story of selling your birthright for just basically a bowl of lentils, and here we are. America has functionally sold it away for the sake of either the GDP or the economy, or thinking that we can all get along. Those nice feel-good propositional creeds about what it means to be an American works really well when the American population, primarily of a majority European Christian heritage and background, is like 85% of the country. It doesn't really work nowadays when half the country is, according to at least the stats that we have, how accurate they are remains to be quite seen, are a little over half as part of that population, and that you have progressive groups from Black Lives Matter to various other, small ethnic, lobbying groups simply saying, oh, well, we just have to wait out until the white majority population is a minority. You can't make a proposition work unless A, you have the cultural capital and power to do so, and B, you're willing to enforce it. And we haven't been willing to enforce anything about the modern norms of this country because that's either deemed racist, or at the very least, the double standard of rules for thee and not for me. And so for Sam Cedar to say, oh, well, that's problematic, it's because he can't say what he honestly wants. Sam Cedar would love to see the destruction of white middle Christian America, and to make sure it never has political power again, and that it bends to the will of everybody else. Because, for him and for numerous other progressives, these ideas of a European or a Christian or whatever sort of background that that lady was talking about, that's not just problematic, that's an existential threat to their existence, because the gravy train that they've been enjoying, the so-called majority report, the so-called progressive wing of history that is always on the right side no matter what, is always advocating for the destruction of a complete other group. And that's why the left is so adamant about using terrorism, because they know that it works, and then they have a long period of history from the Bolsheviks to the 70s of today with revolutionary groups in America in the 20th century, that it works. And it's not that it's problematic, it's that they want to see it destroyed. And I think conservative pundits are having to willingly accept the fact that the idea that I can be blind about these things and acknowledge that certain things don't exist, whether that be our differences in culture, differences in racial and ethnic characters and attitudes about the American idea, those things you can't ignore forever. And as progressives know, those things are very real. They just wish to double down and exterminate the so-called, cause of that, which are the historical white European norms that have ruled this country for a little over 200 years.
Yeah, and you can really feel that conversation is going to happen one way or another. And so, that's one of the reasons that I've kind of been doing the prep work on this, where I've been discussing, Samuel Huntington's book, Who Are We?, where we've been having the discussions on, the ship of Theseus in the nation. Can you replace the constituent parts of the nation and still think that it will continue, even though you've completely change the substance of it? These are all critical discussions the right has to have, especially if it's going to contrast the left. The terrorism of the left only works as long as the right really turns a blind eye to it. And this is how you get a guy like Nixon, right? Like this is the kind of response you've had previously. And you hope that Trump just has that mandate right off the bat. He's already got the electoral mandate. You hope that he feels that he has the authority to take the kind of steps necessary to shut this down almost immediately. Now, interestingly, and this will dovetail a little bit into the conversation we've had so far, but an extension of this, can you deport people who hate you? Can you, if you're going to run a propositional nation, can you get rid of the people who don't like the proposition? Can you get rid of people who are pushing conflict inside the United States? Well, it turns out sometimes you can. So a lot of people are talking about the deportation of this Palestinian student and activist, Mahmoud Khalil, probably is how you say it. This guy is an anti-Israel protester. He's a pro-Palestinian activist. He's been involved in campus protests. Apparently, he did. It's again allegedly, still information that has been undetermined. But involved himself in some criminal actions during these protests, including trespassing. And the Trump administration obviously made an example of him by saying this guy needs to be deported because he's involved in anti-American activity, and he's on a green card. Now, I think this was approached poorly in several ways by kind of people on the online right, Twitter, these kind of things. A lot of them were saying, okay, well, he's only being deported because he is protesting against Israel. And that's probably true. Like that's just kind of obviously true. Because if it wasn't true, we would be deporting every guy waving a Mexican flag or, some foreign country's flag during one of these deportation protests. And by the way, I think we should just do that, right? Like that's absolutely what should happen. If you're here in the United States, legally or illegally, if you're not a citizen, if you're here under our good graces, then if you don't like the country and you're making it clear you don't like the country, you should just get deported, all of you. So this, Mahmoud guy should definitely get deported, but so should all of the guys who are, out there protesting Tom Homan with a Mexican flag. If you're out in the streets, if you're in any way, especially violating the law during a protest, and you're anti-American, you should absolutely be expelled. I don't like that it was only deployed in the service of this one issue. We should be deporting everyone who hates the United States and is here under our kind graces. But this is a start. So I don't want this guy in my country. I don't like why he was deported just on this one issue. But what we should really be looking to do, I think, is expand this. Anybody who is against the United States and doesn't have to be here should go, and that there should be no hesitation on that issue.
Yeah, like if it's a propositional country, And America's just a set of ideas. Well, can we get rid of the people that don't subscribe to those ideas? And if the answer is no, I mean, this guy has at least 24 lawyers signed up over him to making this preeminent free speech issue. And I'm with you again, Auron. I wish that this whole conversation about revoking his visa was not because of a conflict halfway around the world that does not particularly concern the citizens of the United States of America. But instead, here we are with this ongoing debate. I think that, when you see, service members that are showing off the flag of another country that is not the United States, they should be deported and, stripped of all rank and privilege post haste. The same thing with any protester out there. I mean, I hate to, sound hyperbolic, but when you see all these protesters that are waving any flag but the American flag inside of this country, I'm sorry, like, you should just get in the scooper. Like, this is like the movie Soylent Green.
Baby.
Just get in the truck, and we will send you back to where you claim to love so much. And that should really be the force, come hell or high water, because I'm sorry, this is not going to work when and even say like Trump or anyone in this administration wants to take action against the cartels. Well, that raises a fun, important question. Well, now, can you trust the guy that was waving the Mexican flag at the protest last weekend who happens to be your neighbor? Obviously not. And that, that's even a huge more security concern for anyone that wants to join the military for, either expedited access to citizenship or anything like that. Are they going to leak intel, logistics, data, information towards the cartels or anything like that? Obviously not. Immigration is a national security issue. It always has been. We recognized this since the very beginning of the country with our sort of little cold conflict with France in the 1790s and in the early 1800s. We understand that that has always been the case. And it needs to be done. Like, I'm sorry, Mahmoud should not be here, but neither should the countless like Chinese and Vietnamese and Indian foreign students in which most colleges these days make their money, because they most often don't stay here. And when they do stay here, they overstay their visa, and they only contribute to an ethnic patronage system that is allowed by everyone in this country except actual Americans. And that is unacceptable, and they should leave immediately.
Yeah, I have this crazy pitch, right? American universities, but for Americans.
Who would have guessed?
I know. Like, don't get me wrong. I still want us to seize the endowments and salt the earth under the universities. But if they're going to continue to exist, let them only be populated by American citizens. Let American citizens have the opportunities. Let the American citizens have the education. Don't give it to anyone else. You want to be globally competitive? Stop educating the rest of the globe. Tell them to go pound sand. Tell them to build the universities. We'll be fine without them. I believe in the American people. I believe the American people are the very best people. I think that they are the ones that will succeed when given the opportunity to actually thrive inside their own country and not compete with people imported by other countries or by their leaders who hate them. We simply don't need them here. And the idea, I have to hear endlessly about what a threat China is. China's coming for us. China's going to take over the world. China. Great. Why is there a single Chinese national in the United States? A single one. If this is a geopolitical threat, if they are just an existential threat to the existence of the United States, why are they studying in my university? Why are they receiving an education here? They are a threat. You've said so. Get them out of here, right? Same thing goes for pretty much every other country. I do not want foreign nationals in the United States taking up resources that could be going to the people of the United States. And I certainly don't want them here if they're actively protesting against or hating the country. If you're serious in any way, shape, or form about your propositional nation, you can't let guys like this hang out. So yeah, I don't like the specific reason, this being the only reason anyone is getting deported for protesting. I think this should just be expanded. Get him and everyone like him who hates the country and is actively protesting against it out of my country, and do it immediately. I feel like that's pretty simple, pretty common sense. It's the essence of American first. I just don't understand why this isn't the automatic answer to this question. Full stop.
Yeah, and I mean, it also goes back to the question about the whole EB-5 raising the entrepreneurial sort of investor visa cap from 1 million to 5 million. Even then, like, China's got some of the longest held EB-5 visa issuance they've had the most over the last several years when it comes to this program that's been around since the Immigration Act of 1990. I did some cursory research when we were talking about that. It's China, Vietnam, and India. And if we're making this pivot to Asia, why do we want these guys in there? I mean, it raises some important security concerns, because if you were to have a program like that in China or anywhere else, those guys would be monitored. And, at the drop of a hat, if you were to do anything that were to help your home country, you would be kicked out or worse, imprisoned. Or if you were really rich, they'd probably just execute you like they do in China. So these things are really concerning. And we're not doing anything about that whatsoever to actually curb that threat. It's not doing anything for the purposes of the national identity. And instead, really, the only national identity that exists for progressives, and really for a lot of people these days, is a kitschy, gauche consumerism that just mocks and makes fun of the historical American nation and its people for the sake of making money and a quick buck, whether from a Netflix subscription or a TV show. And that's what we've been reduced to. And that needs to be reversed, and order should be restored.
Agreed. All right, guys. Well, we have a number of super chats stacking up, so we need to get to the questions of the people. But before we do, Mr. Prudentialist, where can people find your excellent work?
Sure. So you can find me on, on X as Mr. Prudentialist. You can just go anywhere where you find this lovely little amphibian. I am on YouTube. I am on Substack at theprudentialist.substack.com. I cover literature, political culture, as well as the goings-on all over the world, and primarily with a focus right now just in sort of media and communication studies. And I'll be live later this afternoon on my channel. If you're interested, we'll be covering some recent articles from IM 1776. And as always, Auron, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Always a pleasure. All right, let's head to the questions here. Truddle says, since the discourse is apparently circled back around again, it's time to repeat until morale improves. Christ is king. Yeah, I'm probably going to do an episode on this on Monday, but for people who are unfamiliar, Jordan Peterson, for some weird reason, affixed his name to some report letting us all know that saying Christ is king is very bad because somewhere on the internet, some mean people said it. And so you really should be very careful about declaring, the kingship of Christ, because, someone mean said it on the internet, and, we're approaching Easter. So what would it be if we weren't attacking Christians heading into Easter here? But obviously Christ is king. You can publish all the stupid reports you want. That remains true. We will not be shutting up about it. If you're saying it maliciously to hurt someone, that's stupid. Stop doing that. However, we will not stop saying it because it's true and it's critical. And no amount of mean people saying it somewhere means that you should stop declaring something that is so deeply important and so incredibly true.
Yeah, never hate someone so much that you're willing to forsake your salvation for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Tom says, read your last video on foxes and lion. Is Starmer still a fox? Because he seems to be happy to lock people up and use hard power. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I was speaking mainly in the United States context, but of course, we have seen Canadian government and others deploy force against their populace. And the UK is a particularly good example, because the UK seems to be more committed to this than almost any other nation. They have not turned away from it. Starmer has continued to be straight up tyrannical. The fact that the United States and other nations have not denounced this guy as a North Korean figure is much to our disgrace. Starmer is horrible. He is a tyrant, and he does seem more comfortable using force. I still think, England is an interesting scenario. They have seen the riots, obviously, there. They are willing to put them down. I would still say that we are not full on in lion territory with Starmer yet. But I would say that of the foxes who are trying to make that transition, he has been the one that has been most aggressive. He's still bad at it, I think, which kind of leaves him still in the fox category. But he is certainly more comfortable deploying those tactics than most foxes would be.
Yeah, the saddest words of Tunger Pen was Morgoth's review right again.
Well done. All right, here we've got Dorito World Order, an excellent name. When will you have Sam Hyde on? The minute Sam wants to come on. He's got an open invitation. So yeah, I mean, he follows me on Twitter. So anyone wants to encourage him to hop on over, I'll be more than happy to host Sam. Let's see here. Graham McCain says, I am Canadian, Alberta. Always felt so much Canadian identity was fake and cringe. Good example is the I am a Canadian commercial. Always hated it. Hey, I'm not familiar with that particular commercial, but I am familiar with the fact that a lot of Canadian identity, unfortunately, especially in the political realm, is just about not being American. And that's not a great place to be. Canada has a lot of amazing people in it. I know many Canadians that I think are great people, capable of great things, and so it's sad to see so much of Canadian identity wrapped up in that. But I mean, while they're actively trying to hollow it out and replace it with this post-national consumerism, what else would you really expect?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ruler of the Donuts says at some point there will be real conflict. If the administration doesn't start real defiance, they will lose. You can't appeal and negotiate forever. Again, I hope that that's not true. I hope that people are peaceful. I would encourage peaceful action. That said, it is very clear that the left, like I said, is willing to facilitate violence, call for violence, protect those that engage in violence. And I think the Trump administration needs to take that very seriously. I'm glad to see Kash Patel and others saying that they're going to start treating some of this as domestic terrorism. They need to do more of that. They need to be very forceful. They need to go after the terrorists themselves. They also need to go after the elected officials, NGOs, and other actors who would protect them. This can simply not be allowed. We elected Donald Trump for law and order. He is a law and order president. That is what people want to see out of Donald Trump. They want to see a restoration of order. And so that the action needs to be swift and decisive.
Agreed.
Matt Grenier says, you've seen the consumer nationalism in conservative states like Texas. Normies take pride in HEB, Texas barbecue, tacos, etc. The Cowboys, guns, freedom stuff gets mentioned less and less. Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly true. I want to be clear, just to be careful for a moment. You know, a certain amount of food, culinary preference, these things have always been part of national identity. You know, saying, we cook better food than you, that kind of thing. That's always, I got to give the UK ribbing every time, your food is terrible. We're vastly superior to you in this way. There that some level of that is always going to exist. But when the entire battle is fought, especially on the corporate branding front, right? It's not just tacos. It's, the Taco Bell. It's not just Texas barbecue. It's the specific type of Mission barbecue or whatever. We are eliminating or rallying around brands themselves to identify our nation. That is not good. Now, I do think there should be a wider emphasis on cultural importance beyond just food. I'm with you there. And it is noticeable that food has become more and more the thing rather than some of these other cultural artifacts that are very critical to classic American identity. But I just want to say that, food being a part of your national identity has always been a thing. But the corporatization of this, the branding of it, is the more worrying aspect to me.
Agreed.
The Metal Mystic says, this is the essential conversation. Thanks. Correction. Not 200 years. We've been here over 400 years via Spain, over 500. Stake the deepest ties and claims. OGC is the new cornerstone. Carpe diem. Well, the Old Glory Club is most certainly, I think, a great organization that is trying to give people a fraternal organization where they can rally around American identity. They can help their community. They can build bonds with like-minded people. And so obviously very glad that they are doing that kind of work. He follows up and says, we must import Asia to defeat Asia, even more absurd than fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. Could be war BS. Gotta go. The call to prayer from the mosque is upsetting my dog. Obviously the attempt to say that we're going to favor one, if we import one half of Asia instead of the other half of Asia, will somehow win the battle of American identity is pretty comical, but it is absolutely what was pitched at one point a few months ago. And I hope that continues to get a drubbing that it deserves on Twitter and other spaces that are influential. It seems to have had an impact. The fact that they kind of lost that debate, you can tell because Vivek Ramaswamy is trying to peddle his wares in Ohio instead of run departments in Washington D.C. And I hope that continues to be a level of pushback they receive.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Mike Cernovich, but he was right when he said, "Well, why didn't Canada become a tech superpower?"
Yeah, that's it. It should be super easy. Or the other favorite one, which I think is absolutely correct. If India is such an amazing advantage, why isn't China importing as many Indians as they can?
Yeah,
They don't have to go far, and yet China doesn't seem to
doesn't.
be going through this tactic. Uh, Atomic discourse, or sorry, Aramaic discourse. That's a different one. I agree. Christ isn't king. I prefer to say Christ is God. Again, of course, a lot of different monikers.
The Son of Man has many titles.
Right. That said, the my concern, and again, I'll get into this on Monday. I don't want to turn this whole episode into that because it'll be its own thing. My concern, as always, with this is the attempt at having a chilling effect of on the discourse around Christianity and religion. Right, when the when the Anti-Defamation League or the SPLC was saying that the okay hand signed or drinking milk was white supremacy, we laughed at them, as we should, because it's stupid. Yes, somewhere someone said that, I'm sure, but that doesn't mean that everyone drinking milk or everyone engaged in doing okay is, signaling some kind of white supremacy. However, the very same people who were laughing at those organizations when they said that about milk or the okay hand sign are now saying it about declaring the kingship of Christ. And I'm sorry, but I am not going to stop drinking milk or stop working out or stop doing a hand sign because it's supposed to be white supremacy somewhere. And I'm certainly not going to stop declaring Christ as king, along with Christ being Lord and all the other monikers that usually come with his holy name. Johan Richardson says the Cromwell epitaph, Christ, not man, is king, poison to those who want no authority challenging their rule. So true. So true. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you once again for stopping by. If it is your first time, you should, of course, go check out the Prudentialist, who's doing amazing work on his channel and his podcasts and his Substack. And if it's your first time on this YouTube channel, you need to go ahead and subscribe, click the bell, notifications, all that stuff, so you know when these streams go live. If you'd like to get the broadcasts as podcasts, please go to the podcast platform of your choice and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show. By the way, the show continues to grow on podcasts. I know it's growing on YouTube as well and other places, Blaze TV, Rumble, Odyssey. But really, the podcast the audio only podcast just continues to grow at a rapid pace. So thank you guys so much for listening in. Really appreciate that. And of course, if you'd like to support the show, you can head over to shopblazemedia.com, click on the Auron MacIntyre collection. You'll find merchandise there that you can pick up if you want to support the show, give it to a friend, give it to a loved one, that kind of thing. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. And as always, I'll talk to you next time.